She always finds me.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Cool. I think that is everything. Oh, you can even see my little grammarian shirt. Maybe I don't need this necklace on.
Might distract from your grammarian shirt.
Yeah, we can't have any distractions. I have merch. This is the grammarian chalkboard art, I guess, from a recent video. So repping the grammarian merch today.
Well, you know, if you're a fan of reading novels, maybe you're also a fan of grammar and representing that in a graphic tee. So
why not? Why not?
It looks really nice.
Yeah.
I think it looks beautiful.
It's cute. Hello, and welcome back to Elle's Sci-Fi Book Club. I'm Elle Cordova.
I'm Grace Yost.
And we have the really exciting task of discussing Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro today. One of my favorite authors of recent, I guess you wouldn't call him a science fiction writer straight up, but a writer of many speculative works that I really enjoy.
Yeah, somebody whose talent transcends genres in a very interesting way.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So you might know him from Remains of the Day, Never Let Me Go. This was a bestseller when it came out a few years ago. I think like 4 years ago now.
Yeah, I think 2021.
Yeah. So really excited that you all picked this one in the poll. And let's jump into it. So Klara and the Sun is the story of an android, a little girl, I guess you could say. The story starts out with her in a store where she's waiting to be sold, hopefully to some teenager who needs her. I think they're called artificial friends, these androids, and they're specifically designed as sort of a playmate, almost like a lifelike doll. And their function, is to sort of keep kids from loneliness. As we learn throughout the book, though, there might be other uses for them, and we'll get into that. But Klara is sort of this naive, hopeful robot who's trying to learn about the world, who is hungry for knowledge, has seemingly a distinct capacity for observation and emotional intelligence. And eventually she is purchased by Josie, I guess Josie's mom, technically. And Josie is a young woman who is sick because of a procedure that was done to her, as well as to many other children in the society, which is referred to, I think, as lifted. She's a lifted kid. So that means genetic modification. She particularly didn't take well to the procedure and is now sick. Possibly, it's unclear whether it's going to be terminal through most of the book. Her sister had died of the same illness. So Klara's role is to sort of, provide help to her and friendship, and then eventually we learn there's the sort of dark underbelly where the mother is actually planning to replace Josie, possibly with her.
Should she need to,
right. If Josie were to pass. And Josie does get very ill. It seems for a moment that she will possibly die. Klara learns of her role, and rather than accepting the role, she kind of takes it upon herself to go on this almost like spiritual journey, making a deal with what she sees as like this god-like son, to try to cure Josie. From the outside, we kind of see that it in some way works. Josie recovers, and Klara ends up sort of living out the rest of her slow fade days in unfortunately a junkyard. So that's the sort of brief bird's eye view of the plot. I guess you could say it's a sad tale, but it's also, I think, full of real beauty and has a lot to say about both humanity and the idea of a soul, maybe even religion, and artificial intelligence. And there's just so much to talk about here. I can't wait to jump in.
Absolutely. A really nice summary. I think this book is devastating.
It is devastating.
I think you're like, I guess one could call it sad. This book shattered me, and every book I've read by this author, I mean, it's not going to, we won't get into the details of these books, but even the titles, Remains of the Day, Never Let Me Go, as you might intuit, are in fact sad. It's not going to be like the cheerful rom-com Remains of the Day,
Right.
So I feel like Ishiguro finds new and creative ways to break my heart with every book that he writes, and this is no exception. And it kind of like lingers. I don't know. I was just walking around the next few days, just thinking about it. haunted. I am haunted by this book, but it's so beautiful. It's not a bad experience. It's just kind of devastating. It's a devastating work.
There are moments throughout the book that are devastating, and then of course the final scene is devastating. But yeah, in the reason it can be so sad and so devastating is because we really get to see, we get to know Klara and we feel for her. She is a robot and yet she feels so human, and her feelings feel very universal. So, and right from the beginning, she's in this store and you get the sense her world is so small. She's getting these glimpses of some sort of near future, maybe America, cityscape out the window. She's trying to learn about the world. She's hungry for knowledge, and yet she's kept in this sort of small role. And she's snatching the little bits of information she can gather about people as her days unfold. And then you see the other AFs get purchased around her. She's one of the last of her generation to be bought. And even from the beginning, there's that sort of the politics of like where you are in the store. And, she gets kind of moved to the back, and she's trying to find joy and wonder in her day, even when it's, such a small existence.
Right. I think this book is, so many interesting things about this book. And I think the smallness of it is fascinating. I think often in science fiction, we're picturing these, vistas, huge planets, teeming with people, complicated worlds with technologies fulfilling all sorts of different functions. Here we have glimpses of the larger complicated social context in which the story takes place, but it's just a very contained story. You're in the store, you're in Josie's house, briefly you're at a waterfall, you go into the city for a little, you're back at the house. You could put this on as a play fairly effectively, because it's a very contained story in that way, and it's contained because we're seeing everything through the eyes of somebody who's essentially like almost an appliance in this world.
Yeah, she's compared to a vacuum cleaner,
right, by the housekeeper, I think.
Yeah,
or she compares herself or something.
It's Rick's mom.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. You're right.
Yeah, it's a small world, and yet it's a rich world because her interior life is rich, and she does have this ability to sort of emotionally resonate with the people around her, and she's constantly, she's just she's a good thing, and you want the best for her as a reader. From the beginning, it was interesting to watch sort of the politics of getting bought, and she's trying to navigate her place in this new family. And it's interesting even before we learn about this other thing that the mom has planned, where she's possibly going to replace Josie, or try to replace Josie with a robot version of her, asking Klara to learn as much as she can about her daughter to try to do a convincing imitation, which seems, I understand people would go to great lengths to like avoid grief or to ameliorate grief, but it does raise the question of would that ever be possible in any kind of way?
Could you be convinced? And she's not convinced. She tried a less sophisticated version of that with her older daughter, who also died of something similar that didn't work. I'm reminded of the Black Mirror episode. Do you remember this? Where there's one episode where I think it's a husband dies, and then they create this robot version of him.
Yeah, using like all of his social media and everything.
Yes,
all the data you can gather on someone.
Right, and then he ends up like that. It doesn't actually work in a long-term way either. It's a sad Black Mirror episode. Not to spoil it for you, but that's like every Black Mirror episode almost. But something like that, like a way to cope with losing somebody. Yeah, and people have all sorts of ways to do this, and I think probably something like this is going to exist eventually. Oh, yeah. But then it's a question of can she successfully do this? And she comes to the conclusion that she can't.
Right.
There would be no way for her to do this because I don't know exactly.
She actually says the reason that she would never have been able to do this for Josie is not because there's something necessarily innate in the person themselves, but in the love that everybody else has for them.
Yes.
Like she wouldn't be able to recreate that, which is like the Josie that the mom has, and the Josie that the father has.
Right.
And the Josie that even the housekeeper has. Like the people around her that love her, that's where the special thing exists. And I think we could go even further and say I would struggle to imagine there's a way to really fully I mean, you can't. Like, there's something unique about every person, I think.
Right.
And you wouldn't be able to have a robot just do an imitation.
No, I think it could. I think that there is something about actually experiencing the things a person experiences.
Yeah.
Changes you. It gives you different elements of your personality. And if somebody's just imitating the personality without these important root things, I feel like there would be something that you couldn't quite capture. But it was so sad about what Klara was saying. Of course, she says that at the end, and she's been abandoned by, like, she's given everything to save this child who's, not really, perhaps not worth that level of effort on her part, because she is then abandoned by everybody, and it's a devastating ending, and nobody feels that for her. No one has access to everything that she did to try to save Josie, no one really. We do, but
Yeah.
but like the characters have partial understandings. The father, Rick, they've kind of glimpses of it. So I don't know, it just is sad to me because she is ultimately a much better person than Josie is, and then most of the people in the book are, and yet she has no one. She's disposable.
Yeah. I mean, we really cast so much judgment on Josie. She was a child who was sick. This was basically like a doll for her. Like, and this is how the people in the book see Klara. She's like a bereavement doll for the mom,
Right.
Basically, it's like this plan to sort of allow the mom to avoid her own grief. And Josie, this is like a plaything for her, like something to, like an artificial friend, which is basically a glorified doll for her childhood. And then at a certain point, you outgrow your toys. You go off to college. She had the good fortune of surviving that illness, and we know that it wasn't Klara who cured her, even though Klara sees it that way. And she outgrew her toys and moved on. And in a normal setting, when the toy doesn't have consciousness or like any kind of soul, that's fine.
Right.
And that's healthy, actually.
Right.
That's what you want for your child. But in this case, it's like we worry that maybe Klara does have this interiority and consciousness. And
I think we know she does.
we know she does,
Yeah.
right. So then it becomes problematic when it's like this person, really, Klara, was allowed to sacrifice herself in a really devastating way. She gives of her precious fluid, sort of degrading herself. Now she's not able to keep her memories straight. Hard to say how much of the degradation is like a normal process for an android doing its slow fade, or how much is really just the result of her sacrifice. And then she's cast away in a junkyard to like live out the rest of her days.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do get glimpses of Josie. I think Josie has kind intentions. Like when there's that, she thinks like, oh, I would like it if Klara could go outside, or Klara hasn't gotten to see the waterfall, or Klara wants to know what happened to her old shop, and that would be good. Or even when she's outgrown her, like, well, at least you can stand on some stuff and see outside. Like, she has kind intentions, but she also has this duplicitous. There are different versions of her in different social settings, and we see that in the very what's it called, the
Integration meeting.
Or interaction
meeting.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, where it's like a very artificially constructed thing where their students are all meeting together. Everyone, I guess, all of the lifted kids seem like they're homeschooled.
Yeah.
And so then they have to have, and maybe that's part of the reason why they have like artificial friends, because they're not.
Yeah, it's unclear why they can't all be in a classroom together.
Yeah, unclear, or if it's just like, well, that's the status thing now to have tutors and whatever. So they have to have these artificial meetings where they gather everybody, and the parents are like off to the side, and they have the kids all together. And then we see that she's not really who she is. Rick points this out too. Rick, who knows her perhaps better than anybody, knows that there are different sides to her.
And she says that really problematic thing where she's like, well, now I'm starting to wish I got the B3 version.
Right. And she can't really wholly be trusted. And she ends up like leaving with the other kids and like not really making sure Rick is included. Rick, who is not lifted, who is not in that same kind of fancy class of people. So she has, I'm not saying that she's like uniquely evil, but she's just sort of, she's just like a person who has good and bad traits. But I don't know. It's very sad to me that Klara has the opportunity. According to Klara's logic, she has the possibility that she, through her own actions, she could save Josie. And she continues to do that, even though the mom gives her this, if you take on her life, then I will love you.
Yeah.
I will
everybody's
love you.
Rick's love. Yeah.
But she is so loyal that she decides not to do that. And then so she seems to have internalized all of this. So she's not, she's treated appallingly but is not apparently mad, or she doesn't feel that she's been sort of used and thrown away. She feels like she's fulfilled her function.
And as we start to see her getting, put into the closet and then eventually the junkyard, I was really like, what was ringing in my mind with the words of the store manager saying, like, the children will not keep their promise. They'll promise all kinds of things.
Exactly. That's a great point.
And she just throughout the book is like, Josie's different. Josie will keep her promise. And Josie's promise, of course, is I will never let anything bad happen to you. And she does not keep that promise.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Klara, no one's saying you have to hide. There's this sense of like, I was noticing that there was one kid in the interaction party who had like a little friend in his pocket or something, like a proto. It's like, and that's kind of embarrassing. Like, oh, that's an embarrassing thing that you aren't supposed. It's like kind of.
We've outgrown that.
We've outgrown that. And this is the age where everyone has artificial friends, and then that becomes embarrassing.
Yes.
And so then you have to conceal, but not just then it comes out. It's like not just concealing her for when people come over, but then she just is like abandoned in the utility room.
Yeah. And then eventually the junkyard.
Right.
But again, this is the natural progression of a child's life. They outgrow certain levels of toys. They eventually you outgrow all toys and you go out into the world and you go to college, which is what Josie does. The problem arises when the toys have their own interiority. What do you do with a toy that has feelings and possibly a soul, possibly at least a consciousness?
I don't know. It's incredibly disturbing.
Yeah. So we have to think about like the motivations of the other characters, like for instance, the dad, because he doesn't believe that, the mother is ever going to accept the faux Josie as Josie, Klara as Josie. So he encourages Klara to like give of her precious fluid, the PEG-9 or whatever that fluid is, even though he knows that that's not going to do anything. He's like, yeah, go ahead, destroy yourself. And then maybe this project will be off the table and we can focus on Josie, the real Josie, getting better. So he has this sort of vicious role in this too. Like nobody's really looking out for Klara, really. No. The mother is trying to use her. The father is trying to destroy her. Josie is sort of on again, off again, protecting her and not, using her as well for her own purposes. And Rick is kind of the only one who really sees her.
Right.
But he doesn't really have the authority or the, motivation to really help her either.
No, it's like not even, it doesn't seem to occur to him to step in and,
But he does help her in these ways. Like he's the one that brings her to the barn.
Right.
And we should talk about the barn, and we should talk about really the whole role of the son.
Right.
And worship and religion and spirituality that really plays a huge part in this book.
Yeah. Like a religion of one, a fervent religion of one.
And how a religion might develop in someone's mind without sort of the dogma and the history that the major religions of the world have. Like why is it, of course it would be that like Klara would worship the sun because in her world the sun gives nourishment.
Right.
She's a solar powered thing.
Right.
So the sun provides her with her life force. She would have automatically associate it with like being a powerful thing, powerful being. It's funny that she immediately gives it a personhood. Like he goes behind the building, he hides, he shows his face, like as if he has the authority to do these things. Yeah,
one gets a sense of Klara in the opening in the store. It's like the store provides her with like basically a series of parables that she's using to understand everything else that's happening to her. She sees a coffee cup. Was it who had the coffee cup, the woman or the? Yeah, it was like coffee cup lady and raincoat man having their meeting, and that's love. That's love to her. So she saw that, or she saw the the guy on the street with the dog.
Beggar man and
Yes.
and his dog, yeah.
And it looked like they were dead, but then they came back.
There was like a resurrection or a
Right.
healing, yeah.
And so she's like, okay, well that means that can happen. So she's using she's very observant, but she has such a limited access to the world and to experiences that she doesn't have quite enough data to form more nuanced conclusions. So it's just like, well, that sun has this power.
And then the Cootings
yes.
machine is this evil force which pollutes the world, which then makes the sun angry and has to hide, and he punishes because of the Cootings machine. And then later she sees that bull, and the bull then becomes like a symbol of all evil and violent things.
Right, yeah.
And then sheep are, the sort of foil to that, where sheep are innocent, and that's how people really are. They're like sheep. You have a sort of biblical overtones to that too.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see how a being like Klara would develop, a religion this way. And then, of course, the barn becomes her place of worship, where she goes and appeals to the sun a couple times.
Yeah.
And we see in the barn, throughout the whole story, she's experiencing these sort of fragmentation, like sort of glitching that's happening to her because she's a machine. And it keeps getting worse, especially after she makes her sacrifice.
Right.
And we see in the barn, she's getting things confused. She sees elements of the store within the barn.
Yeah. Because I think the first time that happens, at least that I remember definitely noticing it happen, because it's kind of subtly done, but I think that's isn't it in the store where, so she and Rosa had been stationed in the window.
Yeah.
And then there's this time where they're like then are moved to the back of the store, and that was kind of happening with like the manager's face. Like things start appearing in different boxes.
And then the manager was displeased when she noticed it happening. Remember, she was like, she looked upon Klara with like displeasure.
Oh, I thought that the displeasure was causing it. I thought Klara was like overwhelmed.
Maybe. I read it as like she kind of froze a little bit, and then the manager was like,
"Oh, okay." I thought that it was like kind of in, like there are moments when she gets kind of, it's like overwhelmed by the situation and things start partitioning more.
So she felt overwhelmed, and then
right,
yeah, and I think maybe it's true that throughout the whole book there's always some reason why she's glitching, but it doesn't seem
not
like
it. I think that's like one thing that seems to like sometimes correlate, but I think you're right that there's like certainly the time where like it seemed like things weren't rendering properly in her vision after she does the thing where she gives the fluid, so then that's causing issues.
But it was already happening,
right? It was already, but I'm saying like it's not just like emotional overwhelmment, but I think that first time that happened where there's like, oh, this person that I'm trying to support and help, and they're like the person who oversees us, the displeasure seems to have kind of like unnerved her.
And then other things that cause it before she gives the fluid away are like when she can't negotiate the terrain.
Yes.
Like if there's like a lot of stimuli,
and
that
she's overwhelmed with that kind of thing.
Right. So like she's not able, if she's trying to navigate and she's not able to like keep things straight. So there are a lot of things that make her glitch. But it seems like emotion can make her glitch as well.
Yeah, and then these kind of transcendent experiences in the barn where some like memories are coming in, where she's like seeing parts of the store in the barn. She's sort of like there's like a blurring, and then also oddly enough like having glimpses of Rosa's unpleasant fate for some reason.
And I'm not sure where that came from. Like, are they connected in some way to some central mainframe? Like, how does she know that about Rosa, or is she just imagining?
Yeah, and then I thought like, oh, maybe that's just like a little hallucination. But the other things that she was seeing were like things she did actually experience. And then the manager at the end says that Rosa had an unpleasant, like did not end well.
Yeah.
So that's like the one piece of evidence where maybe there is some kind of spiritual thing going on, some connection. But other than that, I think it seems more mechanical.
Yeah, I guess you could have a reading of this where maybe we just allow ourselves to believe that the sun was powerful and she did heal Josie, because it was kind of strange, that whole sequence where she goes to the barn a second time. She's like, I know I failed with the Cootings machine. Like I can't do them all. I can't kill them all. but I'm just asking you to give your special help to Josie. And then it does seem that the son answers her. There's that whole sequence where the light is flooding into Josie's room. She's on her deathbed.
Right.
And then she miraculously recovers really quickly. And so it's either this coincidence, or there is a reading where it's like, nope, maybe there's this whole thing is real.
Right.
Maybe she healed Josie. There's another reading where Josie died. And I think, I don't believe that this is the case, but I know that some people were having this discussion I was seeing online.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that somehow that maybe Josie did die, and then the skin that what was his name,
Capaldi, yeah,
was developing was then they didn't need Klara in particular for this. They got a different AF probably because they had Clara's data about Josie that they had uploaded during that meeting, and then they got a different AF to take the skin. And then that was the Josie we saw later. What doesn't work about that theory is that Josie grows up. She wouldn't be growing up if it were an AF. So some people like to think that she died. And
I don't think I don't think the book, that would seem odd to me reading the rest of the book.
Yeah, I don't think it makes sense. Unless, because then she's supposed to have more meetings with Capaldi. So maybe he's just constantly upgrading her age or whatever. But I don't see how that would, I think she would stay the same age and then live with the mom the rest of the mom's life,
Right, exactly. And I think that Ishiguro I feel like he would tell us about that and do something. He wouldn't be like this secret, unrewarding twist.
No.
I don't think that seems in line with what the rest of the book is doing.
Yeah. So I think really the two available readings are that there's this miraculous, coincidental healing that happens where Josie recovers. She was going to recover anyway. And then Klara thinks that she cured her and her sacrifice was a worthy one, or it's that, we just buy into Clara's story and she was responsible for the healing.
And almost it doesn't change Clara's role in certain ways, whether or not she's wrong. She was willing to do that, willing to give everything,
make her sacrifice to the sun god.
Yeah.
The other thing I was wondering is the manager character also artificial, or is that a human being? Because there was something sort of strange about that character. She seemed herself to be a little bit inhuman to me.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just the type of person that would work at that store.
Yeah, my thought was I wasn't totally sure if I feel like something especially in the very last part of the book, when she's in the yard, I don't Klara, as I think we'll talk about, is sort of an unreliable narrator accidentally. With her, we kind of mentioned this already, she has limited access to details about the world. And so she's jumping to certain conclusions based on tiny sample sizes. And she's using things she's seen as the window as defining experiences. But at the end, when the manager comes, especially the very last part of that, which I think will, it seems like she's getting a lot of memories kind of tied into one. So I think the manager does actually come and visit her.
Yeah.
But that is kind of strange. It's kind of weird. Why, I remember thinking that, so you no longer are involved with this business, but you're really just wandering around junkyards looking for AFs. And
collecting little trinkets from them remember she was collecting little things in a satchel.
Right. Collecting things, but then not. Because I thought maybe she would take Klara with her, but no, she just says no one expects that. Klara, I think one of the most heartbreaking things about this book is Klara does not at any point object to any of the horrible treatment. She just is that's how it is.
Yeah. I mean, the manager does offer to bring her closer to the other B3s and put them together. But I think there's definitely a reading where the manager didn't appear. And she's just jumbling things. She's hallucinating and whatever. And especially because what I thought was very strange about that was when she was walking away at the very, very end, she has the limp that that Josie has. So now we're invited to think, was it Josie, the whole time visiting her? I don't think that's the case. But was there even a limp? Maybe she's superimposing Josie's limp onto the vision of the manager walking away. And when the manager fails to turn around to look at her, that's really the heartbreaking moment. She's like, I thought for a second she would turn around and look at me, and she didn't. She kept walking. I think we're really meant to read that as Josie, with her limp, not turning around, and sort of she's moved on with her life, and now Klara is alone. Because they have the identical limp. She even says it's on the left side, just like Josie did. And the manager never had that limp in the past.
Right.
So
No,
I really
think
think we're supposed to see Klara as conflating. Either the manager did appear and was actually visiting her, and then when she walks away,
she's kind of flipping through
she's
different
flipping
things.
through,
Yeah.
or it's that she hallucinated that entire encounter.
Yes.
But either way, I think we're supposed to read that as sort of like anyone who ever cared about her, the manager, Josie, anyone, really all just walking away and not turning around.
I like that reading a lot. I also was, to add to that, I thought something about the long coat kind of reminded me, there's this evocative, I guess it's not as like pointed as I had remember it, but there's, she's walked away down the long passage between the rows. It was noticeable how she walked differently to the way she had in the store, leaning on to her left in a way that maybe wearing her long coat on that side might touch the dirty ground. With the long coat, I was reminded of like the waterfall scene where the mom has kind of a big coat and everything.
So it's an amalgamation of
right.
everyone.
That's kind of what I was also thinking that, but I didn't notice I like your reading specifically of the not looking back because
they've all moved on.
Yeah.
She's this like piece of junk.
Right.
You know?
And just kind of putting her memories in order.
And that's her. Yeah. That's what she's going to do until she shuts down is just order her memories.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah.
It's sad. It's really heartbreaking. And, you know, this is what I love. And I'm also kind of just destroyed by every time with Ishiguro. He does this. He finds this way of like humanizing his characters and then breaking your heart once you really are all in with them. You know?
Of course.
So this is how I felt at the end of Never Let Me Go. It's how I felt in Remains of the Day. But it's also just really beautiful.
It is. And I think what what his writing demonstrates to me is like the power of the understatement.
Oh, so understated.
Right. Because there is like, you know, and I like I said, I'm a fan of operas which are not understated. People are dying. They're like, but first a 5-minute aria, you know, like, and they're like, you know, there's big moments where people are like screaming out in pain in movies and things like, you know, like in,
like what? Like what?
Yeah, like, well, well, for example, oh gosh, I can't remember the year now, but Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, do you remember the part where Khan abandons them on the planet? And he's like, you know, you're just going to be stuck here forever. And then Kirk is like, starts twitching and he's like, Khan, and he screams like that.
Iconic.
And it works. It's like this explosion of anger and despair and just, so there can be power in that, but then there can also be power in writing like this, where Klara has no such moment and probably no access to having such a moment, but instead and she doesn't even seem devastated, but we are, because we reflect on the fact that this is obviously somebody who's worth saving and should never be abandoned like that.
Yeah, and just the sadness when she gives that fluid to the Cootings machine, makes that sacrifice, and then we start to see all those shapes simplified, and we see her struggling, and she's like, no, I'm fine, you know, and she's still trying to like negotiate this situation and trying to make sure that her sacrifice was seen and you know, see it through and just sort of never doubting that she did the right thing and feeling fulfilled by that sacrifice. It really is heartbreaking, because you're right, like she never gets to have anger, she never experienced anger, so we have to experience it for her,
right?
Know?
But that's like that kind of thing, like we're reading it and we become used to from the beginning realizing like, oh, this is a narrator with a very particular limited perspective, and she's unreliable not because she's lying to us, but because she doesn't know any better.
She doesn't have the information.
Yes.
Yeah.
So she's relaying everything, and she's highly observant, and she is like, I think if she had gotten more exposure to everything, I think she'd be really, really adept at things like this. But with her limited experiences, we realize like we have to know.
Yes. And we also see her as more complicated than she really even needs to be. Like she seems to rise above her programming a few times. There's the first time when she doesn't look at that child that's clearly interested in buying her because she's waiting for Josie, even though she knows she shouldn't. She's like, I'm going to keep my gaze over here. I'm not going
Right.
to really engage. And the manager chastises her for that and is like, you can't be doing this because these children make promises they're not going to keep. And she ends up being right in some ways. And then we see her do this again where, you know, she learns that the mom has this like plan and she still is like, you know, I could get everything I was programmed
Yes.
to want,
Right.
which is belonging and,
Yeah.
you know, a purpose and love. And even with that possibility, she rises above that programming to sort of be faithful
Right.
and good. And I think that's what makes it so sad, that sacrifice.
Is it like possibly Christ motif, the kind of sacrificing?
Yeah, and then her sort of position in the junkyard at the end, it could be her
Crucifixion.
on the cross, having been crucified.
Right. And cause like she just seems like stuck, like she can't move. I couldn't quite figure out how she was like set up there, but yeah.
Yeah, and we shudder to think what she might have looked like.
Right. But instead of like I don't know, it was also the Capaldi comes back at the end and is like, oh, well, maybe we could like, sounds like crack her head open and figure out what's going on. And then the mom is like, no, she deserves her slow fade. You know, like
one wonders if maybe that would have been actually kinder.
more humane, yes,
Yeah.
than doing what they did.
Put her in the closet.
Yes.
Yeah. That was also just like, oh, don't worry. Like for a while she was just living in there staring at the door.
Yes.
And then like Josie comes in and like lets her look out the window by putting those things up. And it's like, ugh.
Well, that's why like Josie is like, I don't know. I'm not a big Josie fan.
Yeah.
Well, I think parts of that, like that scene where you see a different side of her that we were talking about earlier, at the interaction meeting or whatever. There, it does remind. There's the wisdom of like growing up in this and realizing you're like, even with taking the idea of having an artificial presence here, like don't you have that like do these realizations where you see your friends a little bit more clearly in different social settings, especially as a young person like that, where that kind of betrayal rings true. That's like a standard experience I think a lot of us have in our teenage years, and maybe we have also betrayed people in our teenage years, you know?
Or even adults, how people treat different statuses of people. Like you'll see someone you think is pretty kind, and then the way they'll treat like someone, a server or something at a restaurant,
Precisely.
will show you a lot about them, you know, that maybe they weren't showing you before. And that's kind of what we saw with Josie in that party, where it was like, oh, so she shows all this care and compassion for Klara when it's just the two of them, but then when it really comes down to it, she doesn't really see her as a person.
Absolutely not. Or like her sort of the false kindness of having her stand in the window, and the deep resentment she feels when Klara went with the mom at the outing, when like, what is she supposed to do? The mom said to come with her. It's like instead of resenting your mom for not letting you go, it's easier to blame her.
Yeah, and her treatment obviously of Rick throughout was really problematic. You know?
Of course, right. Like we know that plan isn't that specific plan. They're like, oh, that's the goal of them leaving and existing together against the societal separation of lifted and non-lifted people.
But of course, Josie doesn't do that because she has all the opportunity in the world once she's lived through her illness.
Right. I think she fancies herself she likes to like picture herself as like, oh, I'm this really nice person and I'll like make sure that my AF is happy and I really like Rick. But there's like something false about that.
And I think it's just like when the future wasn't guaranteed, that seemed possible. But once she actually recovers and does just go out into the world and goes to college and has these opportunities, it becomes a different thing. You know,
right.
Now it's like, well, we have to be practical. We're not children anymore.
Right.
And also, that's another thing about this book is like it's a well developed world, but yet very subtly developed as well.
Yes.
Like you have these like the idea of the lifted kids. And then also the ramifications, we kind of see snatches of it. We know that the dad is possibly involved in this like fascist, armed community that's in opposition to the genetic modification. Like you see this sort of like violent world in the backdrop where there's a lot of conflict going on.
And the desirability of living far away from people in the country.
Because it's dangerous in the city. Yeah.
Yeah. There's elements of that, but we don't ever quite see it clearly.
And again, because we're seeing it all through the eyes of Klara, whose knowledge is so limited.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, the dad also is a kind of, well, neither of her parents, like almost actually almost everyone except for Rick, who's
Yeah.
the most positive
and
human
and
character.
the housekeeper.
Well, she doesn't really.
But she's she's a better person. I
she
think,
is,
than,
yeah,
yeah.
but not really an ally to Klara. But like I think,
No, but
yeah.
looking out for, I think, people's best interests, or at
Right.
least I guess Josie. But
right, she knows something is up with Capaldi. She's not right about what it is, but she knows something is weird in that situation.
right.
But yeah, both of the parents, they seem to like have all the all this baggage and all these kind of strange social interactions, and Clara's like hopelessly out of her depth trying to deal with them.
Yeah, she doesn't really understand human complexity, even though she probably has the capacity to, but nobody ever gives her, the time
No.
to teach her.
No, and there's something like that mean thing Josie says where Clara's just trying to be nice, and they're playing like Josie and Rick had been playing the bubble game, filling in thought bubbles on drawings, and she's like, "Well, you could never do that."
Yeah,
Clara offers to be nice
to cheer her up.
Yeah,
because Rick isn't there, so she's like, "I could write in the thought bubbles." It's like you could never.
Right, and then she just accepts that. Just
Yeah.
as at the end, she accepts like everything. That Josie has some kind of fundamental worth that she is like could never hope to achieve,
Because everybody around her loves her, and she wouldn't be able to be the object of people's love. That's ultimately what she says.
Which is like horrifying.
Yeah. Because she sees herself as an absence.
Yes.
She doesn't see herself as someone.
Right.
She only sees other people as having real reality.
Yeah. So now I get this when I read about not to go on a tangent, but when I read about like women composers, so there's a really famous composer, Clara Schumann, who is Clara Wieck, a piano virtuoso married to Robert Schumann. And then, and you can read these like things she's written about her own work where she's like, yeah, it was pretty good, but it is like women's work, and you're
like a reflection of men's work.
She's in the writing in the 19th century. And it's like a knife into your heart when you hear, it's like reading somebody who's internalized the circumstances and they internalize the logic of their own oppression. It's really painful. And I think we see that with Klara. And she, at the end, she believes that she has done exactly what, the right thing and exactly what she is meant to.
Well, she has.
Yeah.
She has. She fulfilled her function. And that's
right.
But that's what's sad is that something this good and complicated, could have this kind of limited function.
Right.
And then have this fate is really sad. There's something really wrong about it.
Right. Fundamentally wrong and all done so sort of like understatedly, which makes it perhaps more painful to read.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're still not at the point with artificial intelligence where we have to worry about this particular thing yet. But I do think this is something to think about. What happens when our toys and our tools start having these interior lives, and do we need to start worrying about them? And actually, let's contextualize this now. Right. This is like our third, well, I mean, you could make the argument that there have been other things, but this is like our third robot story, really. We have iRobot, we read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and now this one. And they all have very different takes on artificial intelligence. And I would say this one really stands out from the other two.
It does, yes.
But it's in dialogue, so we should talk about that.
Right. So in iRobot, one of the ending stories where there's a question over whether that guy is in fact a robot or not.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is all about the sort of the boundary between and how do I tell the androids might be, how do I identify them as androids? Here, no one has any trouble clocking androids. I don't know what it is. Like that just seems to be in this world. I don't know if it's something to do with their appearance or if they have some kind of like light or something, but everybody can tell immediately about like the artificial friend. And that seems to be like part of the issue. They're like humoring her by being like polite to her, but there's no actual kindness, real kindness offered to her other than like civility mostly. Like all of Josie's, overtures prove not to be ultimately sincere. But then I think we're left to wonder with in this book if they're, she does seem to have a soul and to be like a, I don't know, it's different from how the other stories go. Of course, in the other stories, we don't really ever have access to the internal perceptions of an android.
That's the difference.
If you don't think that, if, as we were talking about with Do Androids Dream, if you don't believe that Deckard is an android.
Right.
And I think the book suggests not. So
right. So that's probably the classic reading,
right,
is that he's a human being.
So we don't have access to what it's like to be in the mind of the android, and here we do.
Yeah.
But then in this world, there's no one has difficulty distinguishing, and they're going to those trouble to make a kind of guise for Klara, perhaps to play the role of Josie. And then that's the question, like, will that actually work? That seems to be more of a question of like, people are skeptical of that, where in the other ones, it's like, yes, they could pass as human.
Yeah, and I think really the question is, can she pass as this particular human? Mm-hmm. It's a more complicated question than can she just pass as human?
Right.
You know? But can she pass as Josie, particularly, with Josie's essence and soul? They all say slightly different things, I think, about artificial intelligence. And iRobot, obviously has all the different stories. It's a bunch of different, but it's mostly sort of an external,
right,
examination of the role that artificial intelligence would play in our lives. And then we start to get more sort of philosophical with Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. We see that robots have, dreams of their own, and it asks the question, do they dream?
Right.
Do they have goals and ambitions? And we start to see that. But this is really sort of the final stage. Like, what is it like to be an artificial person with personhood and,
right,
and really a consciousness and
right,
possibly a soul, And I think this is why this one hit me so much harder than the others, is because it just really resonates on an emotional level in a way that maybe the other two books don't as much.
Right. And they're not, and to be fair, those books are not really trying to be that.
Yeah, they're ideas books more than anything.
But here we're so deeply in like Klara's interiority, and we're seeing things like through her eyes, through partitioning, and like
experiencing glitches, which was really creatively done. The way that he's like, oh, and then these boxes, and we see snatches of somebody's face, and then
right,
and then she's having trouble even reading the emotions. So it'd be like mean eye over here and kind eye,
right?
And it's like, what's actually happening? And then when she gives the precious fluid, then it's even more so. It's like now we've got like a triangle, two triangles instead of a person, and just what that would feel like, and the fear that you would feel not being able to identify objects in the real world. And you almost get a sense of like, maybe this is, and at the end when she's like trying to put her memories in order and things are getting blended up, you start to think about like, is this kind of an Alzheimer's dementia-like experience? Can we draw a comparison between her in the junkyard having these disordered memories and not being able to move? Is that kind of like a person in a nursing home with a condition like that, Like, is this the robot nursing home?
Right. Yeah, I love how you put that. Or just like, I think going back to what you said earlier, I think it was so such a good way of putting it, that she perceives herself as an absence.
Yeah. The real people are Josie. And
right.
Really, it's Josie, and then everyone else, the mother and everybody. These are real people. She does not see herself as a person.
Right.
She's only there to like help them achieve their goals. Hey there, book clubbers. Elle here, interrupting our conversation briefly to bring you to the observation deck. This is where people can send in their thoughts, and we might feature them here. This month's observation comes from Toni L.
Hey, book clubbers. Longtime reader, first time on deck. It's interesting to me that Ishiguro invites us so deeply into Klara's mind that not respecting her personhood seems clearly immoral as you read along. However, when I allow myself to step outside of the novel and remember that this is just a story that does an excellent job of personifying AI, I feel it's important to remember there should be a hierarchy of humans well above machine, and at the end of the day, AFs are just programs, convincing as they are. I found myself relating to Melania Housekeeper, who comes across as a bit cold to Klara in the book, but actually seems to have the best sense of this. Am I the villain? Crossed my mind a lot during this novel, though.
I will not be first in line to get a robot friend, and Elle definitely will be. But I anthropomorphize things so much.
Oh, so do I.
Yeah. Well, right. And it's a sort of natural human reaction. So now after reading this book, I was about to like upgrade my phone from 5 years ago. And I was thinking like, you know, I'm like bothered. And then like, no, that's not the same thing. The phone isn't like
Not
Klara.
yet.
Jeez. But,
ChatGPT is probably cruising toward that though.
Right.
One day.
but I just don't think I could bear, if there's like a robot that is like a person that I'm talking to that wants to be outside, that like, you know, likes the sun. I can't be like, bye. Like I don't think I could do that. But I also didn't grow up in a world where such things were possible immediately.
Yeah.
You know?
I just got back from New York and I saw a few Broadway plays. There's one called Maybe Happy Ending, and it deals with this idea of these robots that are obsolete. So now they're like living in robot old folks home, and they're, you know, trying to find purpose without their owners. Their owners have all moved on to like newer robots. So what happens to a robot that has consciousness and has outlived its purpose?
Oh,
This is the
interesting.
kind of thing that just shatters me, and I worry about it. Like I actually worry that we are gonna, in our lifetime, see this happen. If we're creating these things that are so complicated, maybe there is a time where we start to have to worry about their rights and their feelings, and I will be the first in line for a robot friend, but I also will be somebody who's like, you know, aware of these things. I worry about the people that are first in line for the robot friend that are not aware of these things. You know, we get somebody like Josie's not even the worst case scenario.
No, like that one of those boys who's just like wants to throw the AF.
Yeah. I shudder to think what their AFs are going through. It's probably somebody
Right.
more like Rosa, you know, the other AF in the story, who had a worse fate. You know,
who we see for some reason Klara has access to that.
maybe she got paired with a child that threw her across the room just to see what her balance was like. You know, there are all kinds of things that are going to happen to these things,
I know.
and one can only hope that they'll never be conscious.
I don't know about that. I really don't know, and I don't know if Josie is really that much better than those people. It's like she's not going to be overtly cruel, but it's, you know, not seeing this is like not a person.
I don't think you're thinking of all the possibilities, the things that people would do to these things.
No, I mean, I don't think Josie's much better than like throwing the robot across the room, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I think she maybe is a little bit better than that.
I think abandoning, is that worse? One moment of like trying to catch yourself, is that worse than sealing somebody in a dark room for like weeks?
Yeah.
That's really
I mean,
awful.
really, it's all terrible.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's just like a little, I think I'm just interested in the way that like civility, because this is something that can talk, like people like are all civil, but then there's no question that this is not a person, and it's fine that we dispose of her, you know?
Yeah, nobody seems to wrestle with this,
Yeah.
whether she's a person.
Right.
You know?
No, and
Rick
I think
doesn't even.
right, and I think that that's like it's important for people not to think that, because if you do start thinking that, then you start thinking like, isn't this kind of a weird slave system? And that's maybe
Yeah, and we're sort of invited to think maybe Josie was thinking of that when she was a child, and she was first like, well, you'll come home with me and I'll
Right.
give you the best life, and
Yes.
you'll never feel sad or lonely, and I'll just make sure that nothing bad ever happens to you. So we start to trust Josie, like, well, maybe she will
Yes.
be really a great owner for Klara. you
right.
know?
And there is something charismatic and interesting about her, and has kind intentions. But there's no getting around the fact that you just don't really see this as this android as a person.
Right.
And then that will allow you to be like, no matter what, like, you know, like she starts introducing the idea like, you're gonna go away, you know, and like hugs her like for a really long time, like, thanks so much,
Yeah.
you know.
The way you would thank your trusty vacuum cleaner.
Right.
You know?
But like, and then feeling good about yourself because you said it's like almost worse to be like that, you know. Because it's like a performance you're putting on for yourself to be like, I'm so kind, and you
Yeah.
know, and then to just be like, yeah, and then this thing that provided me all sorts of companionship, but I still see as a thing,
Yep.
it's gonna be gone when I get back.
Yeah.
I didn't even throw away my teddy bear from childhood.
I know. Well, we all grew up, you know, in our generation watching Toy Story. So,
Well,
it's-
yes,
so-
yeah.
And Brave Little Toaster, even more heartbreaking.
Yes.
I didn't want to throw away a single thing that I kind of anthropomorphized in my mind.
I know.
So I was worried
I know.
it was going to try to find its way back to me and have to go through all these trials. But one thing I want to make sure we talk about
Right.
is I was learning, I read somewhere that Kazuo Ishiguro, when he originally wrote this story, he conceived of it as a children's story. Like he would make it into a picture book.
Oh, interesting.
And he ran it by his daughter, who was an adult daughter. She was like in her 20s at the time, I think. Still is, maybe. I don't know. But he ran it by her, and she was like, don't. This cannot be a children's story. It's going to shatter them.
Of course.
Yeah. So he was like, oh, maybe it is more of an adult story. So he fleshed it out, and but you can kind of see, it has a picture book sort of visual world to it.
But that's often his writing is very cinematic.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so that it's like visually highly evocative. I remember thinking that in the other books.
Cinematic, but then I'd say here it almost feels like a picture book. Like I picture these simplistic drawings almost.
Mm-hmm.
The way the way the imagery is. Like she'll look out the window. It almost feels like you could see it in an animated setting. Or
yes,
or
absolutely.
Painted in some way.
Yeah.
So I feel like it retains its picture book style, but is and its simplicity. Like you could technically probably read this to a child, they would get it, but there's so much more like subtle devastation happening.
Yep.
That it's not in any way a children's story.
I guess so that opens up an interesting question, because I think, I would not classify this as young adult fiction for all these reasons, but technically I think the marker of young adult fiction, the most important marker, is that your narrator has to be a young adult, which like Klara very clearly is.
Yeah.
It's just I wouldn't be like handing this out to a 12-year-old, because I wouldn't want them to be shattered.
Yeah. It's a big thing to deal with. Like this question of, an android that it's where its personhood is sort of, called into question or just never maybe acknowledged.
Never acknowledged, but then kind of proven in their actions. You know, that they're, I think, don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, like, obviously, there's like a humanity she's like the best person in the entire book by far.
But we're the only ones that know that. She doesn't even know that.
Yes, right. And that's awful. I don't know, it just really bothered me. It really, really bothered me to read this, but I loved it too.
So I read this when it first came out in 2021. This is my second reading of it, and it bothered me more the first time. I knew it was coming the second time, so I actually just reveled in all of the...
She reveled in it.
Yeah, I did. I reveled in all of the, the imagery and the symbolism. And on my second reading, I was able to more closely examine the world. Because I blew through it the first time.
Right.
I read it on tour. We were like playing a bunch of shows in Europe. And I read it like in one night, one sleepless night on the bus. And I just blew through it because it just was captivating to me. But now this time I kind of took my time, and the ending didn't bother me as much because I knew it was coming. And, and I just see it as this beautiful, well-realized tale and sort of a parable. Like you said, I really like how you put that, like Klara's understanding of the world is like a bunch of parables. And I love how they function in the book.
Yes. No, I mean, it's so beautifully done. And I don't know. But sometimes I don't know if I'm going to be able to reread this and not be troubled.
Yeah. But I think in many ways, this is a novel that really is of our time right now. It has a lot to say about many of the things that are happening. We worry about artificial intelligence. We also are thinking a lot about genetic modification. We have this CRISPR technology now, which allows people to do gene editing with relative success to cure diseases and prevent diseases. But also, one could imagine soon, unless we really legislate much more expediently, we might start seeing this sort of thing where, people get advantages, genetic advantages, and how will that shake out in our society? So the idea of the lifted kids, I think, is really prescient now too.
Absolutely. Like right now we're very familiar with socioeconomic divides causing vast disparities of outcome in people's lives. So if you have access to funds and you can get your kids into the better school system, or you can provide, if maybe your kid is struggling, you can get them a tutor preparing for SAT, ACT. You can also have services for that. You can have every available advantage, and then that already leads to such great disparities in outcome. And then what if you have genetic advantages? Yeah. If you're genetically susceptible or, sort of skewed, I don't know what genes you'd have to mess with to figure that out. But, so we'll have class systems sort of even more etched into into realities
Yeah.
that, is incredibly troubling. And I don't have a lot of faith in the US government. I mean, you'd have to be like a world regulations too, but I have very little faith in the US government to regulate against any type of abuse right now.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting too in the book to see the different, reactions. Like the dad clearly lost his job to lifted people.
Yes.
Right? That's, I think, what we're supposed to
I
see.
thought it was it artificial?
He was substituted.
Okay.
So it wasn't clear whether it was an artificial being that took his job or whether it was a lifted person. But I assumed it was lifted because he seems to be in opposition to the whole enterprise because he's part of this, he has these political leanings and he's part of this armed community. So I saw it as like he probably lost his job to somebody who was genetically modified.
Yeah. Yes. There's some kind of technological, something edged him out, and he has, he's like bitter, and that's part of why he's so so crappy.
Oh, we can swear.
Oh, we can swear. So awful to Klara, like he's against the whole thing, the entire enterprise.
Right. And then I think you could make a comparison between the lifted children and the AFs having different, degrees of ability. And Klara is always worried that her generation is left behind by the B3s. And then, of course, they'll probably be B4s and it'll on and on, And so it's like humans and artificial beings are both experiencing this sort of left behindness.
Right. Obsolescence.
Obsolescence. Yes. There you go.
Yeah.
With the advent of like new technologies.
Yes, absolutely. And that's kind of a major thing introduced right away with, as you say, with the new models. But then there's still Klara's series of the B2s is in some ways they have advantages that the B3s don't.
Well, you get the impression that each one is unique.
Yes.
They're all programmed differently and they all have different advantages. But this is why I actually thought it was interesting to me that Ishiguro didn't show the sort of alliedness between Rick and Klara, because they're both like left behind in some way. Klara is a B2. She's not the newest model. She's worried. She has anxieties about the newest model sort of doing better than her. Rick is left behind because he's not lifted. I thought maybe they would form this friendship and look out for each other, and they kind of do, but they're not. They don't really. It's not really that way.
No, it's not. I mean, they're both literally left behind in that interaction meeting, which goes sour, and then they end up talking instead. And then Rick does help her, and then both of them help Josie, and both of them are discarded by her as soon as she's feeling better. It's no longer important to have Rick and to have the plan. It's no longer important to ensure Klara is happy. Once she's no longer in need of them. So they are both discarded, but Rick also, if there's a hierarchy, he's still obviously on a higher tier than she is. Yeah. And so when they're all hanging out, well, she's just sitting on the couch, not included, and then they're having their little drawing game. There's no thought to make sure that she is part of it,
Yes.
know? So he's not really an ally. She has no actual allies, and that's what's awful.
I know. I was hoping he would be an ally, and then he never really is. And it's interesting to think of what his future will be, because he's obviously naturally gifted. He has this understanding of how to build these drones, these little bird drones. He's gifted. He's a gifted engineer, and we saw a glimpse at the very end that he goes on to develop these things that are then used as little spies.
Right.
By the communities, spying on cults and spying on basically the cults that similar to the one that the dad is in. And so I imagine he goes on to be radicalized against the genetic modification. He's probably going to go on to become this leader, maybe because he is a really gifted kid. He'll go on to develop more increasingly, problematic technologies. Maybe eventually we see him developing bombs and other things, and he gets more and more radicalized. I could actually see there being a really great sequel to this with new characters and everything, but in the same world. I'd love to just know how it shakes out.
Yeah. But it does also seem like, I don't know if artificial friends are kind of out at the end.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell or if it's just that these are the earlier series. And so but it is quite devastating, the parallel between the beginning and ending. She's sort of stuck observing in the beginning, drawing all sorts of conclusions about the world, waiting, And then there are B3s there. And then at the end, she's like rehashing everything she's learned and trying to not to mix it up. So she's sort of like processing everything, but still kind of looking around. And there are also B3s, and she's like in this holding pen again. It's like beginning and ending in limbo.
And the fact that the B3s are in the junkyard too really indicates that a lot of time has probably passed at the end, which is another reason why I'm not sure the manager was there at all. And I'm not sure the manager was human. Like, she could have been another artificial life form. There's one moment in the book where she's like, I thought this person was someone like manager, but it turned out that they were...
That was a housekeeper. She thought that she's trying to assign Melania the role of like her...
But like artificial?
Yeah, I don't know.
I read it as like, I thought she was artificial, like manager, but she wasn't, you know?
Yeah.
Or it could just be, I thought she was in a position of...
authority over me.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be advising me on what to do.
I guess you could see it either way. But yeah, I wonder how much time has passed at the end. Like, are we talking a decade, 2 decades? Are Josie and the mom all dead? Is this like way in the future, post AF?
I'm more likely to think that she hallucinated the manager than the manager's artificial, just because but then it's hard because we don't have a lot of detail about her and she's only in the first section.
Yeah, I think the fact that she walks away with the exact limp that Josie had indicates that maybe she was just an hallucination, and then has the mom's overcoat.
Right.
She's just this sort of figure that represents everyone.
I was thinking so whether or not that's like the entire thing is in imagining, or if she did show up and then she's just getting a little confused at the end of the visit.
Yeah, that could be too.
But I don't know. It's like, it does seem really, like we were saying before, it does seem like weird. It's like going around in junkyards. Why? You know?
Yeah.
I think that both of those readings are available.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one can see why Ishiguro has won the Nobel Prize in literature.
Oh, yes, definitely.
And whether, you particularly resonated with this story or not, I think there's no question that there's a lot here to be talked about. I couldn't wait for this discussion.
Right. And then one thing that we were talking about is that, often people who write science fiction, like that's their kind of like, hey, I'm going to write science fiction. And he absolutely is not. He does like all different styles, like Remains of the Day is like a period piece, and then Never Let Me Go, speculative, more along these lines, but he does like other genres as well.
Historical fiction. Yeah. I mean, he is disrespectful of genre lines, and I think it's really cool. Like some people who are big sci-fi fans are not really a fan of this guy because he is so genre averse in a way. Like he doesn't respect the boundaries of genre, and I love that about him.
Well, I think I appreciate that because I think that there's sometimes, as I'm sure people know, if you are a fan of science fiction, there's some genres are sort of seen as more interesting, or inherently artistic, inherently valuable than others, which I think is ridiculous. Like any genre can be interesting and have interesting things to say. I really don't like when people determine an entire genre as like uninteresting.
Yeah, like horror or sci-fi are often the butt of that.
Right. No one who's reading these, who's like participating in this book club, thinks science fiction isn't worth doing, but I think it has a historically lower marker of has been valued lower than other types of fiction, which I think is ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think within the genre, there people, different books are trying to do different things.
Right.
Sometimes you are just trying to tell a fun adventure story, and that's fine. Like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a great example of just a really fun romp.
Yes, exactly.
You're not going to be, there's not like a lot to dig into in terms of character. But then you have something like this, which is doing, I think, a lot of very deep character work and not maybe telling the most interesting on a plot level story.
Right. We're not getting into the tech specifics. We're not really, which is often where a lot of science fiction pays a lot of attention.
Hard
That's
sci-fi,
not
anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And he's not trying to do that, but I really appreciate that. I think there's room for all sorts of branches of science fiction. And I will say Ishiguro's cinematic style of writing, where there's these sort of beautiful the depictions of partitioning here lends itself very well to adaptations. So Reigns of the Day and Never Let Me Go have been adapted, and there's a coming film adaptation of this novel.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so it's going to be directed by Taika Waititi, which is exciting.
Oh.
Probably my favorite film by him is that I've seen so far. I'm not an expert on Taika Waititi, but Jojo Rabbit, gorgeous and haunting film. So he's directing it. Jenna Ortega is going to be
I love
Klara.
her.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And then probably like the most perfect casting imaginable, Amy Adams is the mom.
Oh.
The mom is so Amy Adams when you see it.
This is going to be a hit.
Yes. So I'm really excited to see, because I think there's a lot with, if you have a visually imaginative director like Taika Waititi, who has that kind of eye for things, I think he could do something really very beautiful. And the cast is, so I will absolutely see that. I think it would be. I'm interested to see it and to have my heart broken in a different medium. I
just think so much of it is going to depend on how they're able to externalize the interiority of Klara.
Right.
There's so much going on in her mind that's what's really touching, is trying to see her trying to understand the world and understand people and their motivations, and you really get a sense of her goodness because of her thoughts. And I just wonder how will they show that? Yeah, how will they show the goodness and the sort of like endearing self-effacement and but it'll be interesting to see. Right. I think maybe it just really, they need to get a really good screenwriter to be, to be able to externalize the interiority. Right. There could be some sort of creative voiceover situation, or she could be confiding in the son or something. Like there are ways that you can get that, and then you have a really gifted actor like Jenna Ortega who can I'm sure it'll be very interesting whether or not we think it totally lives up to how amazing the book is. Yeah. So looking forward to that. Yeah. Going back to the discussion of genre, I like to think of this book club as it's a sci-fi book club, but it's really more of a speculative book club. So we're not interested in only the narrow view of like hard sci-fi. We really like stories like this. And I hope, we'll continue to, people have been picking great books so far. Of course, yeah. And I'm sure the next one will be just as interesting. So, and with that, this is a reminder to vote on the next book. The poll is now open. You can find it on Patreon. Thanks so much to all of our patron members, free and paid, for making the book club possible. This has been such a joy this whole year for me. Reading more books than I'm sure that's probably a lot of people's experiences. It's good to get something to, have you read a book. There's a lot of ways that you can spend your time, and easy to get bogged down in your job and not give yourself time to enjoy reading a good book. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, with that, I look forward to seeing the next book that you all choose and getting into it. And in the meantime, happy reading, keep looking up, and see you next time. See ya.